Railway Conversations with Dr. Frank. This is Steve Allday.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Today's episode is the second of two parts covering a recent live discussion about high-speed rail in Australia. My main guest is Stephen Allday from Sydney in Australia, and there are also some contributions from the audience during the live event. In this second part, I questioned a premature lock-in of railway as a default technology for intercity passenger land transport. And I asked why alternative technologies such as maglev or Hyperloop are not even briefly investigated, if only to rule them out in a qualified manner, and by doing so, adding more robustness to the chosen technology, which at the moment is rail. This debate, which thanks to the controversial Hyperloop technology is even more loaded than the general discussion about high-speed rail in Australia, shows once more that civilized discourse within our industry is possible by applying appropriate levels of mutual respect. And I hope we can see more of this in the industry in the future. This podcast is not sponsored by third parties, which means uninterrupted listening to the episodes for you, and I hope you appreciate and enjoy that. If you want to support the show to keep it going, there are two ways you can do it. One is the typical request for podcast: subscribe and share with your friends. The other one is specific to the show and myself. I host a training portal with arguably the world's most comprehensive course offer on digital signaling technologies and everything to do with high capacity. Some of my trainings are one of a kind, which means unique in the world. For example, the high capacity signaling blueprint, the high capacity railway mindset training, or most recently, my course about digital signaling interoperability. All of those courses are online, so you can watch the lessons at times convenient for you and as often as you like. And there is an industry-leading Q&A support where I will answer your questions not just during your training, but at least for further 12 months after you completed your course. What you can do that would be really nice is checking out this training portal, which you find at docfranktraining.podia.com. That is docfranktraining.podia.com. And if you find that you or a coworker of you can benefit from any of those courses, I would be very happy to see you growing your knowledge, understanding, and confidence through any of my trainings. Thank you. But now, please do enjoy this episode. I would like to change gears a little bit here and throw something into the discussion, which is another thing that I was heavily criticized before, and that's the selection of the actual transport mode. I think what we established in the previous discussion is that for a high-speed connection between Sydney and Newcastle, you've got to have a separate corridor, which is entirely separated from existing lines, be it for suburban traffic, for freight traffic, even more so for freight traffic. So it needs to be a completely separated corridor. And anything that you do in integration, this new high-speed connection with the other traffic, with the likes of Sydney Metro or Newcastle Light Rail or anything in between, Sydney trains, will be via interchange stations. In the same way that you have an interchange in Central between Sydney Metro downstairs and Sydney trains and New South Wales train links upstairs. So when you have a completely dedicated corridor anyway, where you can't reuse existing tracks, you can't reuse, or you don't want to reuse, or can't afford to reuse existing tracks, existing stations, and so on, why does it have to be rail? Why can't we think about some other mode of transport? The reason for that is that with rail, I think there's a physical limit to the speeds that you can achieve. And I would dare say that absolute ceiling speed is somewhere in the area around 400 kilometers per hour.
Yep.
I mean, even the Chinese have not gone any further than 350 operational speed. And I think the world record for high-speed trains is currently set. And I'm not talking these things with rocket in the back or something like that, like real high-speed trains that also operate on commercial networks is somewhere around 403 or 405 or something like this. So that makes me think that 400 kilometers an hour roughly is a ballpark ceiling speed for metal on metal, wheel on rail for a railway system. Okay, yep. So that kind of speed is less than half what you can achieve with a commercial airliner that flies between Sydney and Melbourne, let's say. So when we talk about the long distance connections, so forget about Sydney Newcastle. We discussed this sufficiently, I think. So let's talk about the big vision of Sydney to Melbourne and Sydney to Brisbane. There you need to compete with air travel, because the majority of the travelers, which are business people, use airlines to go between Sydney and Melbourne. So you've got to compare yourself in terms of journey time with air travel, but you're doing this by using a transport mode which can only ever achieve less than half of the speed of air travel. So what I thought would be a sensible idea, and that's not me promoting a different form of transport. I'm just saying in a business case, you've got to look at different technology options. And you can't just go, we use rail because Japan is using rail as well, and Germany, and we have a rail system in Sydney, which is completely separated, but never mind. So the alternatives I think that are there from a technological perspective are maglev, where I think the ceiling speed is probably closer to 600 compared to 400 for rail, and Hyperloop, where allegedly the ceiling speeds could be anything between 1,000 and 1,200 kilometers per hour. So that would actually be a speed that could be comparable, if not better, than the speed of airlines, of planes. So if I need to segregate the corridor anyway, if my only transport integration is via interchanges, why can't I look at other technology options, extrapolating in the future? We're talking about like a 30, 40-year timeline. Maybe rail isn't the best suitable system anymore in the future, especially not for a long distance connection between Sydney and Melbourne. And I'm really talking point to point. It's a different story in China. Yeah, you mentioned Wuhan to Guangzhou, 970 kilometers. I know because I was bid director for Siemens at the time and we lost, unfortunately. So, and they chose rail. Why? Because it's connected with the rest of the Chinese high-speed rail network everywhere. So you can't just have in the middle a Hyperloop thing or a maglev thing, because it just would not be interoperable with the rest of the network. However, if I just look at the point-to-point connection, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, with a starting point between Sydney and Newcastle, shouldn't I at least have a look at alternative technologies? So what's the opinion, Steve, of yourself and also the audience, maybe?
All right, I'll give you my opinion if you like. Are we actually trying to compete with airlines? I'm not so sure that we are, if you know what I mean. At this moment in time, I think regional airlines, absolutely we can, because that, you've got an airport at Newcastle, which I think that would be challenging to keep that one going, if you know what I mean. I think you have to ask yourself, and again, it comes down to defining requirements. It's a big difference between, connecting Sydney to Melbourne, Sydney to Brisbane, by rail, by high speed rail, and is it for competing with airlines, or is it for other reasons? And that's what will come out of these studies, I think, because I think it's a big step, if you like, which is why it's way in the distance around that interstate high speed rail, for want of a better word. So the case for me is I was going to say baby steps. I don't mean it that way. Sort out what your real problems are at the moment, which we talked about and we've had some good conversation on, which is your regional connectivity and getting that right and starting to get that growth in the regions. And then separately look at what that long-term network might look like and what is the purpose of that network.
Yeah, but the thing is, Steve, when you consider Sydney Newcastle as the starting point of a connection between Sydney and Brisbane, you cementing in the technology selection by using rail, and I mean I'm just playing devil's advocate here, or other people call it backward thinking or whatever. If you choose, and I can absolutely understand why people think that way. If you chose rail, like metal on metal, as the transport mode of choice for Sydney to Newcastle, it would almost make it a no-brainer to say, and now we've got to use rail for the rest of the line, at least from Sydney to Brisbane. And then going south, do we really want to have a technology break in between? What about people who want to go all the way from Brisbane to Melbourne and so on? So, and I mean, all I'm saying, I'm not, what many people have misunderstood in the future, I'm not peddling Hyperloop at all. No. I'm just saying the technology is out there, and for a project that may take 30 to 40 years to materialize, will there be people in the future looking at why on earth went Australia for like an outdated technology that's no longer state of the art? And by doing so, not allowing themselves to achieve journey times that are anywhere near comparable with air traffic.
But again, I'll come back to it, Frank. You know, there between Newcastle and Brisbane, there are many other reasonable-sized cities, or you know, which need connectivity, and you know, so the question is, you know, they need that. It is the challenge to try and compete with the airlines, because on those very long distances,
but
I suspect
yes,
not. But it does seem to say now isn't the right one.
And I'm not saying you should ignore these at all. What I'm saying is, in the same way that you need a dedicated corridor for high speed between Sydney and Newcastle, you will also need a dedicated corridor for high speed between Newcastle and, say, Port Macquarie and Coffs Harbour and Ballina and whatever else, all the way up to Brisbane. So, and if you, because the existing rail corridor is decrepit or there are gaps in there, it's not good enough, all for all those reasons. So the same rationale that you have for Sydney Newcastle, you basically have for all the remaining routes with stations up to Brisbane. And what an additional benefit would be of Hyperloop compared to rail, the acceleration and deceleration is a lot higher. So that means you're losing less time for additional stops than what you would lose in a metal wheel or metal rail system. So that means that having additional stops, and you do want to have all those additional stops, you cannot go along the coast from Sydney to Brisbane and not consider a stop in Port Macquarie or not consider a stop in Coffs Harbour. Nobody would understand this, right? Nobody. And you have to stop at the Gold Coast and all these kind of things. So, but all these additional stops cost you journey times. And then you say, oh yeah, well, but we have a mix of express trains and direct trains and all stoppers and all these kind of things. And then you need to think, well, where do you overtake each other? So I still have to see a proper simulation of that operational concept. And I understand that will all come in good time.
It will come. Yep.
But if you did have an alternative technology that provides you all kinds of benefits that are clearly better than the mode of transport you're going for, at the very minimum, I would think you need to justify why did we go for this and why didn't we go for that. And just saying because the technology wasn't mature enough in 2024, I don't think that's enough justification. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, no, and I wouldn't argue with that. I might even call him Michael again, because the cost of Hyperloop compared to the cost of high-speed rail, or higher speed even rail, would be astronomical, I would suggest.
You think so? I would argue the
Michael?
other way around. But maybe Michael has an idea there. I don't know.
It is horrendously expensive. It's horrendously expensive. And the thing with Hyperloop, in my view, it certainly doesn't work on a small island like ours. One of the great things we haven't talked about problems in the UK is the small size of the country. While you actually need high-speed rail, but to then go to Hyperloop is just off the Richter scale. It really is. Why do it?
Yeah.
Unless you want to do it because we want to be as good as everyone else.
And again, I think that's where I come back, Michael, to a degree. You've got to look at what you're trying to do. Are you trying to compete with the airlines? I don't think you are. I think it's a different kind of challenge when you're doing those longer, much longer distances. And don't forget that the other thing that we forgot to mention in this is when we get these services in place, it's all about what that service is as well. The journey starts when you get on the train. For a person doing business, they can start their business. They get on the train. You can't do some of that stuff on the aeroplanes. So it's not about beating them in that sense. Sorry, Mike. Yeah.
Well, but if you look where your patronage comes from, you've got to take a significant chunk, especially if you talk Sydney, Melbourne. You've got to take a significant share of passengers away from the airlines in order to make it work. If anybody came to the idea of building a business case around tourism, oh my God, yeah, you better get yourself a new brain. Yeah, so nobody, I wouldn't expect anybody in the high-speed rail authority to be that naive, really. So you if you want to get your patronage, you've got to attract passengers that travel the connection most often, and these are business travelers. So, and I mean, I've flown between Sydney and Melbourne as often as anyone, if not more, at least during a certain period of time. And what I always manage to do is to go from Sydney to Melbourne in the morning, like on a 6 o'clock flight or something like that, have meetings in Melbourne from, say, 8 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, going back to the airport and be home the same day. If I have a rail connection that takes 4 hours between Sydney and Melbourne, I can no longer do that. I either have only a meeting window of, say, 2 hours during the day, which is ridiculous, so it doesn't really justify going there, or I have to plan an overnight stay and then go back the next day, which I'm not really sure. For me personally, it would make this much less attractive. But this is something that needs to be considered. Where Sydney Metro, for example, they had certain avatars for target clients, like different groups of people using public transport, and then they basically put themselves in the shoes of those passenger avatars and thinking about what are their specific requirements and how can I bring all of those together into the best possible public transport system for all of those passenger groups. Now, a similar thing needs to be made for high-speed rail. I cannot assume I'm taking away 50% or 70% or whatever of current airline passengers if I don't offer them an option that's clearly advantageous. And again, that's it. I think it's just logic to think that way. And I think it should be something that should be investigated in a feasibility study or in a business case. And my experience from the past is that, if anything, the patronage forecasts were grossly optimistic, without much justification. And I mean, if somebody who is not a high-speed expert can basically question those things within like 2 minutes, they are not robust enough, I think. What's your view, Steve?
So you say in terms of patronage on the high speed?
Yep.
I think you'll find, certainly, and again, I'm going to differentiate. Let's get to where we're going. In a planned, organised manner. The local, the regional growth requirements first, I think you find if you do the patronage sums now, that those figures of the past are underestimated, and they can be much, much larger. I think we still got the question that the longer distance, I still, and I know Michael put his hand up, he may want to come back, but I do question, is it really challenging? Are we really challenging to take vast sums of people off of airlines onto that, or are we aiming at something different? And I think that's going to be part and parcel of the outcome of this study that is going to be carried on this year, and it will define the way forward. I personally, and I know you're clearly very keen on Hyperloop. I can't see that.
No, I didn't say that. I just and Steve, maybe you fell into the typical trap that everybody else. I've been beaten up so much about peddling Hyperloop, and to the point where I was approached by Hyperloop whether I want to be their I don't know, promoter in Australia or something like that. So it's ridiculous. Anyway, but what I am saying is, as part of a decent business case, you've got to look at different options. Not just for the start and end point of your railway line or your high-speed connection, let's call it in a neutral way, but also what kind of technology you're using. And this applies to everything. Are we going standard gauge? Are we going narrow gauge? Are we going broad gauge? Are we going 25 kV AC as a traction power supply? Or are we going for some ancient DC power supply, which we have so often in Australia? I mean, it should be a pretty straight answer there, but still, you've got to answer those questions. You've got to look at those questions, because if it turns out in hindsight that there are options that you didn't even look at because you didn't thought it was worthwhile, or you just forgot about it, you kind of look silly, especially if those options happen to be good ones. So, and I had this from personal experience when I started consulting the railway here in Perth. Everybody said, well, we're replacing our existing ATP system and it will be ETCS level 2. And in stations, it will be ETCS level 1. And I looked at this, why? Because we had a consultant here for 2 weeks and this was the advice that he gave us. Okay, so I looked into this and I didn't say I suggest some other technology. I just said, well, for the capacity ambitions that you have in Perth, there's another technology around which is called CBTC. In the previous study that you have produced, CBTC was basically dismissed on very shaky grounds. Like, we believe it's less suitable. So if at any point in the future, somebody in politics, the transport minister, the premier, anybody hears about CBTC and sees, this is done by Sydney Metro, this is done in Melbourne and so on, why don't we use CBTC? And the answer is, well, we didn't really look at it at all. That's a pretty poor answer for a thorough business case. So I basically just said, look at the option carefully and come up with a solid, robust argument why you go for this, why you go for that. I didn't say change the option, not at all. As it turned out, they did change the option because they realized suddenly, wait a minute, we think now that we really compared those options at eye level, we now realize that CBTC is probably giving us more of what we really need than ETCS would have given us. So it did lead to a technology change. In the same way, it could lead to a technology change here from rail to Hyperloop or maybe maglev, but maybe not. Maybe the purpose is just to have a decent justification why these technology alternatives are not good. And if you don't have that justification, I think you've got a gap in your business case where you can be attacked on, where you just didn't apply enough due diligence. You just made up your mind. This is the technology we go for. You ask the question, why is this? And interoperability is not the answer to that question because we're talking a separate network here. So what else is the reason? Other than we didn't look anywhere else. And that's poor. That's a poor outcome. Well, at least that's my view.
Well, I mean, on the basis that we both agree that we've got to sort the way to get a high-speed network in place is by gradually building up on the regions, by default, it's got to be rail.
Why? Why, Steve? Why?
Because you wouldn't put we're not talking Hyperloop to Newcastle, are we?
Why not? Why not? I'm not saying Steve. I'm not saying you've got to build Hyperloop to Newcastle, from Sydney to Newcastle. I'm just saying make a study, look at it, justify it. If there's a decent estimate done by a qualified quantity surveyor, and they said we've done the cost estimate from Sydney to Newcastle for Hyperloop, and we did it for rail, and the price of Hyperloop is 4 times as high. Yes, the travel speeds are much faster, but we still, on that basis, we decided we can't afford Hyperloop. We do it. Steve, we did something like this back then, and that was probably before you came to Australia, because I was here once before. In 98, 99, when we looked at high speed between Sydney and Canberra, we came up, or the industry came up, with 3 different technical suggestions for that high-speed connection. One was a tilt train on the existing rail alignment, which can basically lean into curves. You know very well from the UK what a tilt train is. The second one was a streamlined corridor for high speed based on the French TGV train. And the third suggestion, guess what, was maglev. So we did this before, and the outcomes of those 3 options were very, very distinctly different, both in terms of journey times and in terms of cost. Now, at the time, the decision was made by the government at the time to go for the middle proposal, which was the French TGV approach, and then the project didn't go anywhere, so everything was scrapped. But at least they had the options on the table, and they could say, okay, based on decent information, decent analysis, and decent offers from the marketplace, here are the criteria why we decided for the high-speed rail option and not for the maglev option and not for the tilt train option. This is all I'm saying. You just need to look at the options carefully enough to justify why you're going for this, and not just saying, oh, well, that's the only thing that came to mind.
I think that, and I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate here, and I don't disagree with you, but I think, you know, we've already heard, you know, there's bits and pieces in the chat, and you hear from lots of other people about, this is just going to be another study. This is just going to be more money for consultants to give us another study that will tell us we've got to do further studies. I think we've gone beyond that. I think what we've done is we've had a number of studies. We've identified, and we're in the process of identifying what our requirements are. What do we actually want this to do? And starting off with the regions. And I think that's the reason why, you know, the time for then revisiting, should we use a different technology, I think is gone. I think we've got to make a decision, and we've got to move with that. If there are consequences downstream, as you rightly highlight, in terms of the larger connectivity of the bigger, huge state cities, then that's a conversation for downstream. But I think, again, I already raised, I question whether we're actually trying to compete with airlines on those mega distances, personally.
Yeah, but the conversation... But the conversation later down the line is spilled milk, right? Decision is made by then. There's no way to steer it back. And I would argue that all the investigation studies you're doing at the moment is basically with the blinkers on, because you only focus on rail as a transport mode and nothing else. If that's the decision, fine. I'm not saying you couldn't do that. All I'm saying is that there may be a point in time where people look back and say, oh, really? Was that a good idea? Yeah.
But coming back to where we started, Frank, do you remember? Because we had the big debate around 250K, 350K. And I think we all agreed that we don't need to go beyond 250K for the regional. So by default, we've almost set what our technology should be, and how it then connects better with the existing network.
And Steve, with respect, this is another assumption that you're making that's not proven one bit. So you could prove this by doing proper modeling of transport of journey times. So if you have a rail corridor which only allows you to go over 250 in like 5 minutes or something like that, you can produce modeling, journey time modeling, which will show you that your travel time saving maybe, I don't know, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, something like that, which is ridiculous. Nobody has ever done a study what journey times would be possible with Hyperloop. What if such a study was done and somebody told you with Hyperloop, and I'm making this up at the moment just to build an argument, if somebody made a study and could demonstrate that you could do Sydney to Newcastle in 25 minutes, would that be of interest? I guess it would. If the journey time difference is like less than 5 minutes, but the price is 3 times of the other option, but then you've got a clear basis to say, and this is why we went for this option and we dismissed the other one, and everything's good.
And our question,
nobody knows what journey time a different transport mode could give you between Sydney and Newcastle. I don't know either, because none of us has ever done a study in that regard.
But
and that's a shortcoming.
One would struggle very hard for getting a Hyperloop built and connected where it needs to connect with the existing network, because don't forget, you've got to have connectivity. I question whether you'd be able to achieve that, because the bulk of what we're talking about here with the new alignment is a large chunk of it will be tunnel.
Yeah. And in the tunnel, why can't you put a Hyperloop tube in a tunnel? I don't understand. We're talking a dedicated corridor, and all you're doing is you put a different technology into that. If you were using existing railway lines on only parts of the journey, I would rest my case. I would say, okay, well, that's obviously something that doesn't work with Hyperloop ever, and not with maglev either. But if we agree, and I thought we did agree, that you need a separate corridor where the only interfaces with other transport modes is interchanges. I can't. I mean, in Sydney Metro, for example, in Central, you're using different trains for Sydney Metro than you're using upstairs for Sydney trains. In the future, when you have Sydney Metro West coming in, you will probably use a different electrification system as well. You use completely different technology. Well, yes, it's still trains. It's still wheels on rails. That's the same. But other than that, you could even use a different rail gauge if that's what you wanted to do on Metro, because it does not affect anything else. So I don't really think anybody can make a solid argument off the cuff saying it's impossible to use Hyperloop. Nobody can do that. Not without any decent investigation. And people may say, well, we don't want to spend the time. We don't care about this. We're fine. We just make the decision. And then I would say, well, yeah, that's fine. But you still have a gap in your due diligence is not as due as it could have been. And that's all there is. I just wanted to throw it out there and say, well, what other people think about that. And again, I am not pushing Hyperloop technology. I'm just saying you've got to look at it before you make a qualified decision for one way or the other.
And yeah, my view is I think we've done enough thinking about how we build a high-speed rail link that we actually have got to make some decisions here and the decisions rail and move forward with that. That would be my opinion. But let's.
But on what basis? On what basis? That you had a visitor group from Japan that told you about the Shinkansen, and of course it's a train on rails. I mean, they built that stuff in the early 60s. Of course, Hyperloop didn't even exist as a slide pack by that time, nor did maglev, by the way. So we're looking at technologies on the basis of this is what we know from other countries. And in 1964, that was a fantastic concept in Japan. Is it still a fantastic concept in 2024, 60 years later in Australia? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. but at the moment, what I'm missing is the rigor of the investigation, and then consequently the rigor of the discussion around it.
Yeah.
And if you say, well,
you.
we just made up our mind, I question on what basis? On what basis do we say it has to be rail? And then all the arguments are basically just dissipating and not existing. Yeah, I don't understand this.
I mean, as I said, I won't argue with your view that your view that should happen. But my opinion would be, if we go down that route, we'll be spending another 10, 15 years still discussing what's another option, what's another option, what's another option, and we'll never get anything built. I think the decision's made in rail, and we should move forward as to what is the right rail and what does that look like. That's my view. That's purely my view.
If you allow this to take 10 to 15 years, then yeah, I would say it's your own fault, Steve. But well, you can do you know them well. You've been involved in business case work. You know that these studies don't have to take this long. Yeah, I mean, look at the problem. Let's go back to something that you agree you do want to do. So you said one of the upcoming things is to identify where are the terminal stations in Sydney and in Newcastle. Can we agree on that? That's due. Yeah. That's a due analysis that needs to be done. So what do you think? How long should this take? 10 to 15 years?
No, because I hope not. No, because the work's already been done previous to. They're not starting from scratch. They're taking what was done in 2013. There's been 2 other ones since, and the latest one that was done in 2023. You don't throw that away. You start with that, and then you fine-tune that, and then you apply what your requirements are of today, which they've clearly got some very clear ideas of what they want to do, and you move it forward. So it shouldn't need to take that long. If you start to go down another technology, then I think you're in serious danger of really slowing the whole process down, and we will go into that endless debate.
I would argue that the other thing that I talked about can be investigated in next to no time as well. If the High-Speed Rail Authority were assigning one employee, one part-time, reaching out to companies that offer Hyperloop technology, there are only 2 or 3 in the world, I believe, and say, would you be interested in a market feasibility study for Hyperloop in Australia? They would just rip your arm off, and they would give you concepts and ideas, answering all the frequently asked questions, give you probably even rough cost estimates, something like this, in 4 weeks. Or let's say 2 months to make it real. So I'm not talking years. I'm not even talking 1 year, let alone 10 to 15. But what you're saying is, I don't want to look at this at all. And I mean that's fine if that's the decision made. That's okay. I don't think it's good, but it's got to be accepted because that's just what it is. But then the risk is how many other decisions are made based on, I just believe this is the best idea, and we don't want to look at anything else. And then we come to the decision, is it Sydney, is it Central, and do we ignore Western Sydney Airport, and what about Parramatta and this and that, and we just, we don't really think that people in Parramatta need a high-speed connection. That's our opinion. Just take it or leave it. Yeah.
Just to come back on that one, you said about 2 or 3 companies who do Hyperloop. I'm going to bring Michael in again. I apologize, Michael. And you said in 2 or 3 weeks, they could give you a rough cost estimate. I don't think that would fly, personally. Michael?
No, I don't. I mean, I put my hand up a minute ago about the whole question of cost estimates and consultancy. When I appeared before the Oakley review in Spacious 2 in the UK, which was supposed to be the definitive review, whether it went to go, HS2 had spent £11.9 million on cost engineering quantity surveying in the previous 12 months and could not provide Doug Oakley with an estimate. I was the only person who provided an estimate for various reasons. The point I make about this is that Hyperloop, I've looked at, you question them, you challenge them, you come up with more questions and answers. There is a certain reluctance amongst the companies offering it at the moment to show all. Somehow they need you almost need a prototype project for them to invest some capital, some money into to basically produce this information. It may be a one-off. It might be like Brunel's atmospheric railway in South Devon in 1838, that sort of thing. It went, but it didn't work. It never happened again. You're probably going to have to give them a prototype project to prove this one way or another. Australia, the United States of America, possibly France are the ideal places because you've got space. We haven't.
But you look, if you can't, it's a bit like, if you're a bit like, you're a journalist. You're a journalist, somebody is accused of something. So what you need to do as a decent journalist is to ask for that person's opinion. If that person doesn't choose to not comment, that's what you write down. And you've read this often enough in newspaper articles, what have you. Same situation here. If you say, well, we did inquire the Hyperloop industry, the Hyperloop suppliers, and they couldn't get their act together, or they couldn't come back with a decent answer within 5 years, then that fine, case closed. But at least you did something about it, and you didn't choose to ignore it because you thought you know what the right solution is before looking at everything else. That's the only thing. And I think the planning stage and the business case stage should be those things where you look at those different options. Because otherwise, how do you make all the other decisions? How do you choose your terminus stations? How do you choose which type of train you're choosing? Are you going for the Japanese system or the French system or the German system or the Chinese system? What is your electrification that you're using? What are the which is your commercial model, your contractual model that you're using? All of these things could be decided on a whim without any justification, just because you think it's the right idea. And all the options that may be out there reasonably, we just dismissed them. We didn't think it was worth our time looking at this. This is what it seems to me.
No, and I think you're totally wrong on that, Frank, with all due respect, because I think they're doing a lot of they're doing a lot of work right up front. They are, the things you talked about. What type of train? Well, that is something that they will decide. It might not be 25 kV. It might be who knows? It could be hydrogen. Who knows? That's the bit they're going to determine, because that will feed into the tunnel width and all the rest of that. So those are the kind of things that they are going to look at. In terms of the stations, a lot of work's already been done. So it's not a matter of thinking something and pulling it out from thin air. It's already there, and it's fine-tuning it and deciding what is the right answer, and then locking that in as this is what we're going to do as a requirement, price it up, go to the market, get it built.
Okay. Trying in wrapping this up, I'm trying to leave this on a peaceful note between us and on something that we can agree on.
We are.
I believe, and one statement I believe in very, very strongly, should be transparency of the whole process, and transparency of the analysis, and transparency for the public, the interested public, including the railway industry. And I think that doesn't happen very often, not just here in Australia, probably elsewhere around the world, because of the potential scrutiny, because of critical voices. And what I kept saying, and how I always did my work when I was involved in business cases, I thought my investigation of options need to be so thorough and so well documented that anybody could come later and say, why didn't you go this way? And I've got a piece of paper saying, based on this knowledge at the time and these selection criteria at the time, that was our decision why we went for this option. So what's left to say is that somebody is, I've got a different opinion than you, or I don't agree with your selection criteria, whatever, but nobody can accuse me on I haven't done my work. Nobody can accuse me I had my blinkers on and blindly went into a certain direction just because this is what a consultant told me, or this is because what I saw on a holiday in Japan, or God knows what. And unfortunately, I wouldn't bring this up time and again if I hadn't seen so many nonsensical keeping up with the Joneses argument, especially in this whole discussion around high speed. Fortunately, not from you, Steve. That's why I wanted to have the debate with you, but from so many others that it's really not funny. And I really do hope, and I think we agree on that as well, that the High Speed Rail Authority will bring this rigor and this common sense into the discussion, and hopefully also the transparency that people, including the skeptics, can look at this and can say, okay, I would have decided otherwise, but at least I understand why they made this decision. And at the end of the day, it's not my decision, it's theirs. So fair dinkum.
Now, I think we're finishing on a note where we absolutely do agree, Frank, and I do have that belief in the High Speed Rail Authority that they will give that transparency. They know what they're doing. I believe everything I've seen to date would demonstrate that. That, as I said earlier on, they've hit the ground running quite hard. That they're out to market with a lot of things which demonstrate that they are thinking these things through. They are looking at all of those options in terms of what will be the final solution, including generating. And I don't know if my colleague's still there. If James is including a set of requirements. For them to then do the designs and then go to the market on. So I do genuinely believe that they will do that, and it will stand rigor. And I think the other thing that they intend to do, which is what Michael raised as well, which is to become an informed buyer, not just to be a buyer that follows.
Well, what I realized now, and we have used up our 2 hours, so I will wrap this up any minute. What we haven't discussed at all was the initial point of our discourse when you did your post and when I commented on that, which was your optimism regarding the project costs. I didn't want to bring this up, especially not with regards to the whole big thing like Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, because we are in agreement, and it's always important to basically settle on an agreement and then build on that. We do agree that it makes a lot of sense to start small, to start with a small part of a potential future high-speed network that is undebatable, useful, which is Sydney to Newcastle, and then basically let them play around with it. And if it turns out that Sydney to Newcastle again blows out the cost by a factor of 3, as does Inland Rail at the moment, if it turns out again that the duration of the project blows out by a factor of 3 and it's going to take 20 years instead of 5, that's a factor of 4, by the way, I can do the math, then maybe people second guess whether it's such a good idea to extrapolate this experience to a wider, longer railway line. Because I think that the cost will probably turn out to be much higher than the optimistic hopes at the moment. I hope I'm wrong. I really do, because I want to see railway projects built, particularly Sydney, Newcastle. And I think another set example of a cost overrun and a schedule overrun would further reduce the confidence of politicians in our industry. And that would be a bad thing, a very bad thing.
I wouldn't disagree. I'm going to let Michael, because he did put his hand up, so I'll let Michael speak, but I've got something to say on that one as well. But yeah.
I'm sorry to come in when you're wrapping up. When you talk about cost, Frank, it's possible to deliver HS at high speed in the UK 35% less than has been stated. The one thing I would say to anybody in Australia, for God's sake, don't follow the example set by the consultants put HS2 together with the forms of contract, contracting, and the bureaucratic methods they did it. I'm throwing a bit of a curveball, and I'm actively looking with private finance and private investors, including 2 from Australia, about resurrecting parts of HS2 using private methods and private. You can do it cheaper. It is not a consultant's fee fest. Believe you me, that there's a lot to be learned from what went wrong in the UK for the rest of the world.
I absolutely agree with that. It's you do need to do some proper planning, and I mean I even suggested to investigate a bit more outlandish options such as Hyperloop, just to have a robust investigation of all those things. But then once you have identified what are the key points that need to be decided, and once you've given yourself a limited time frame, not forever, to sort out those decision points, then you should really go into implementation, and you should implement as quickly as you possibly can, because then you have a window that, if it can be kept shorter, you reduce the risks of strange things happen, and that can blow out the cost, that can blow out the schedule of the project, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I agree that the planning shouldn't be a never-ending story where, which is predominantly to stuff the pockets of consultants.
Yeah, Frank, coming back to kind of wrap up one of the things that you said, you mentioned Inland Rail. It's a really good thing to look at Inland Rail. Where did it go wrong? Right at the beginning, because it didn't have its requirements set out. There's a very good report that was written by Kerry Schott. Read it. It's really, really tells you everything, and I think one of the things she actually said was, how can you build something when you don't know where the beginning and end is? And we're not in that position. We don't intend to be in that position. Get your requirements right. Understand what it is what you want to build. Understand the technology. Wrap that up. Look at there are history. There is loads of lessons to be learned from the UK and the rest of the world, where you can get your constructability better and understood. Learn from those lessons, and there's no reason why the dollar sign that we put on the business case can't be delivered upon.
And for people with a short.
Yeah.
And for people with a short attention span, I think the executive summary of the short report is 2 pages. And I basically hung over the toilet after those 2 pages. So that was already enough for me to really, but how can one of the key landmark projects in Australia be run like this and governed like this? So because you are spot on, it's not just a matter of planning, it's also a matter of governance. Like deciding which consultants to listen to what degree independent reviews are needed. And you probably figured that I'm a strong proponent of independent reviews. And also when has been done enough work to actually make a call and go on with life, basically go over to the next decision, so that it doesn't take forever and it doesn't eat up tons of money in the process. Before we wrap up, I've seen for the last more than 2 hours Paolo's face, and I know that he's been intimately engaged in this whole high-speed discussion whenever it's coming up. Paolo, you want to say some final words before we wrap up, or are you just happy listening in and giving me an occasional thumbs up?
Look, I was very happy to be in the room, and I've never met you before, Frank. And Doc, he's a Doc.
It doesn't matter. I hear to both.
I think it's been great. We should get together. Steve, I've met before. I haven't met any of the others. Some of the others that I have met were in the room, but are now gone. It may have been a bit long, but look, I don't agree with you at all about the Hyperloop. I think the Hyperloop is dead.
Nobody does. Well, the Hyperloop guys do, but that's a different story. They have an agenda.
I believe the Inland Rail has a lot of lessons in it. And I'll just say that I've been following the Inland Rail for quite a long time now, and as well as the high-speed rail, right from the word the BHP joint venture. And the Inland Rail has got a lot of lessons. And the main lesson has been, to me anyway, is that it's going into the wrong place. How can you build a rail network from Melbourne to Brisbane to take up the freight and with the auspices of transferring road freight to rail freight, and not go through the main instigator of the freight, and that's Sydney? How can you do that? And that's always been the question in my mind. And they knew that right from the start. When the reports came out to go for the Inland Rail, there was a political decision. It's as simple as that. They knew that it wasn't going to relieve the congestion in Sydney. It wasn't going to take up all the freight. They're only going to count on about 20% of the freight between Melbourne and Brisbane. So, it was a wrong project. Now, what I'm about in all this is to bring in the fact that, you were talking about competing with air. We can't compete with the air. It's as Steve says, we have to go along the lines that we are trying to service the regional towns. That's what it's about, and it's about resettlement, and resettlement includes industrialization. Therefore, my group, I believe, is the first group that has started talking about 2014 that we should be talking about not just high-speed rail, but freight rail as well as high-speed rail. And we are following the model of the Europeans at the moment, that you can use high-speed rails for freight as well, up to a certain size, and you separate them by time. Night traffic freight, day traffic passengers. So I'll go as far as that. Now, we have gone a lot further than that, but I'll just stop at that at the moment.
Yeah, and I wouldn't disagree.
Now, I'll just also say that in the last 12 months, there has been a high-speed rail association started. At the moment, John Alexander and Joe Langley are heads of it. And Joe Langley was in the room a while ago. And the secretary, Damien Ottaviano, was also in the room. And I'm part of that as well. So, we are moving. I think it's going to go somewhere this time. Yeah.
I just think we probably need to follow up on this, because you have just opened so many cans of worms. We could talk about inland rail. We could talk about the combination of high speed and freight, which will inevitably mean that you no longer have a segregated network. You will have to have connections to other parts where freight trains are going. And then you have the interoperability problem again. Then you also have certain requirements regarding technology, regarding signaling, regarding the track layout, the quality of the track, and so on. So there are examples in other countries where you have either just dedicated high-speed passenger networks. China is one of those. France is another one. Then you have network examples where you have a mix of passenger and freight. Germany is one. And the track quality between those two examples is very, very different, which again will have an effect on the cost, as Michael could confirm if I gave him the time. By the way, talking of Michael, we are in discussions of having a separate discussion on the podcast here, specifically with regards to high speed 2. So anybody who should be in the audience and might be interested in more information on what's happening in the UK, there are plans to cover this as well, but I didn't want to cover it today because today was obviously about high speed in Australia. And to avoid talking for another 2 hours, which I'm up to, but probably not the audience, and especially not Steve, that late in the evening, I would like to thank everybody who was a part of this debate, of this conversation. What I definitely did sense was that there is a lot of agreement or potential agreement for things that just make sense. And if I can wish for one thing going forward, is to take the obvious nonsense out of the discussion from both sides, from the pro side and from the con side, and basically agree on things that are agreeable simply because they make sense. And if more people did it like this, and I hope we could mostly do it in this discussion today, then I think the industry would be better off, and we would probably also come to better outcomes for our main rail infrastructure projects. So with that, I just claim the final word. Thank you very much for everyone, especially for you, Steve, to be the guinea pig here for this live discussion, with the risk that we might have sat here on our own. I will, for those of you who joined later, I will have recordings of this session here, and I will publish them as dedicated episodes of the podcast, probably in 2 parts, because most people don't want to listen to a 2-hour podcast. They will be published in the coming weeks, and they will be announced on LinkedIn as usual. So thank you very much, everyone, for your interest, and I hope you use the opportunity to listen into other episodes of the podcast and tell your friends about it, that it's not complete rubbish that we're talking about here, even though your host may bring up issues such as Hyperloop on occasion. Thanks very much, everyone. And
thank you, guys. Bye-bye. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry. And I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share. And until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Thank you for listening.